Hello, I'm Sally Ann Airy, and welcome to Fearless Forward, the podcast that asks leaders how they face their fears. Today I'm in conversation with a remarkable leader whose extraordinary career includes being a stand-up comedian, a big impact social entrepreneur, a facilitator, coach and keynote speaker, and a funeral and wedding celebrant. His life experience has also given him unusually deep insight into the duality of life and death, and the great thing about that is that he knows how to celebrate life and has a gift for inspiring others to do the same. This gift has literally had a worldwide impact. Sanderson Jones left his first job as an advertising salesman in 2008 to become a stand-up comedian. By 2012, he'd sold out at the Sydney Opera House through single-handedly selling his tickets. He's also performed sell-out shows at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, London's Union Chapel and National Theatre, and Australia's Adelaide Town Hall. Ever since his mother died when he was 10 years old, Sanderson has been grappling with life's big questions, and his shows often found novel ways to engage with these and connect to the joy of life that he'd eventually found in his teens. One idea that came to him was of a church that brought people together not to worship God, but to celebrate life. And in 2013, he and fellow comedian Pippa Jones launched the Sunday Assembly. Before long, it became a worldwide movement of non-religious congregations inclusive of all, no matter what their beliefs. Along the way, Sanderson met and married his soulmate, Imogen, an equally extraordinary person, and they soon had 2 sons. In 2019, he founded a culture-changing community-building consultancy he called the Lifefulness Project to help teams and organizations create culture, meaning and purpose through retreats and offsites designed to inspire community and mutual support. Sanderson also works with the multinational consultancy Capgemini, helping design and facilitate gatherings where very senior people can solve complex problems. But just 2 years ago, as family and work life was settling into a steady flow, a massive thunderbolt tore Sanderson and his young family apart. I've invited him onto the podcast today to share with us what he's learned about life and death that might help us embrace them more fully.
So I tell you what the funny thing was, so like March 2 years ago, I was looking at doing stand-up as a sort of just for fun, because, I'd now got this job at the big consultancy, which at university I was sort of like, oh yeah, I'm really going to go and join a PwC or a KPMG. Like every bone of my body was straining against that. Also, I didn't realize I had ADHD. So basically anything which involved a form was out for me. So sort of worked both ways. So I was there and I was thinking, you know what, my life's quite boring. I've now got opinions about supermarket, self-service stations. I go to B&Q now. Previously, I'd been doing all these weird jobs, which meant that when I got on stage, most of my stand-up was sort of not really relatable at all. Oh, you know what it's like when you start an atheist church and, end up spreading it all over the world. Oh, you get called the Pope. That sort of thing. And then also like knowing that I had ADHD, because before I was just like so confused, being like, I can remember like saying I can't do what I want to do and I can do, like the huge frustration just. And so I sort of was looking at open mic gigs and being like, oh, I can just do this for a bit of fun. We're sort of steady. My wife has I think she's just in the process. She wanted to go and retrain as a clinical psychologist, and everything looked very steady. And then in the middle of March, Imogen went to she'd been having these headaches and went to get an MRI and discovered it was a brain tumor. And it actually just was on my iPhotos. It just happened to be on the pictures from the 16th of March, just going to swimming with my son. And, there's the before swimming, and then there's the, she rang up and, she said, I've got something to say. And I was like, please tell me when I get home, because I don't want to hear it in a changing room of a swimming pool. And then she actually came back a bit later because her best friend went to see her. Her best friend was pregnant, and Imogen said to her, "Guess what, Lua? I've got something growing inside me too.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
And so you're finding, like, we never got a sort of prognosis because, it was, we hadn't yet got to that stage. We hadn't even started radiotherapy. We'll just do the things in front of us. But inoperable brain cancer goes generally one way, unless you're in the miracle world or some other strange thing. Or you just stop eating gluten.
Of course.
Yeah. I've got the various eat yourself healthy books that my wife bought. And, when I think about things that I'm keeping and things that I'm not keeping, I think those can go get recycled. And the really messed up thing is that we were just starting this. And so this podcast is about fear. And obviously there was fear, but not fear of actually what happened, because radiotherapy started sort of at the end of May. So my Imogen's mum was a sort of like very senior nurse who manages a GP practice. My sister's a consultant oncologist. They came to all the meetings. We got second opinions. It was all, and radiotherapy, you might start to feel a bit bad at about week 6. And then on the Tuesday night, she had these really crippling headaches, but worse than, this is the second day, worse. She'd had them before, but this was just the worst. And then we were going into the cancer ward the next day. So we waited until that. And then the guy said, oh, look, it's probably, her brain was more inflamed than we knew. And so they don't give steroids as a thing, and that's an anti-inflammatory. And so he gave them to her, and then she spent the night there. And, and I was with the boys that night, and I sent her these little messages, which I played her the next day. And I can remember with them sitting on my lap and being like, you know what? Because my mum died when I was young, and I know that there are gifts in it as well. And I thought, we're going to be so close, our little unit. And then, so anyway, I went in the next day, I saw her, we chatted, the doctors came around, everything's going better. I went back to work for a meeting, and I got a call. And she wasn't conscious, but she was now, her heart had started again. And I remember running, and I don't know, as you get old, you don't know whether you're meant to run for things. Like if you're late for a train, as a kid, I'd run, and I was sort of running, and then I sort of running a bit more, and then I just opted for full run, and then she was surrounded by all these, people going to the ITU, and there was the little Post-it note that I'd left her at the end of her bed, because I was just gone for an hour, and we're waiting for her. And my eldest boy, he ended up being in ICU for 10 days when he was born. And I was more worried for that because, I didn't know. And it's just that not knowing. And so when I was there, I was like, well, this is the not knowing part. And then what happens is all the doctors are and it's fine in the end. And every medicine happens. And then my best mate came. And then at 3:30, this doctor came in, and it was just said, so I'm afraid I've got the worst news. And I just, my whole world collapsed.
Can you remember your thought in that moment?
Oh, in that moment, it's just no thought. It's just fucking screams and tears, and just the whole world just disappearing. And it's beyond anything. It's just such a overwhelming, powerful physical force, like a cataclysmic sense of loss, but beyond words. And I suppose at the same time, one of the advantages I had was that because my mum had died, I'd already made space for death in my life, and that this is part of life. There's this one song that, came up on a playlist that Imogen had, and it's called Kinder, and she'd been listening to it, and then I did, and it was it's just about being grateful for everything. And there's this one line, it's I know I don't want more. I've got what I came for. And what you come for in life, or at least from my point of view, is really powerful, transformative relationships. And it's only in marriage that you say, until death do us part. But that is the footnote on every relationship. And it was always going to be one of us. I mean, if you lined up what she had eaten and drunk and put into her body, and lined up what I'd done with mine, the money would not be on the sort of quite pathetic amount of glasses of wine in her queue. But there was, I think, I don't want to sound a twat about it, but like it was part of my worldview. I mean, if you've ever heard me talk, well, if you've heard me yammer on about life and death, even when she got diagnosed, I was like, oh my God, I do not need a double first in this subject. Thank you very much.
Well, do you know that crossed my mind too when I was doing a little bit of research before our conversation and so on, and when I read that your mother had died when you were 10, that was my first thought. I thought, God, did you really need to experience that all over again?
Yeah. It's 3 which gets you into grief athlete point of view. Right now I'm sort of semi-pro, like fucking another hideous death next to me, and then I get on the sort of TVAM couch.
So let's
hope that doesn't happen.
Let's hope that doesn't happen. Thank you for the words.
But I suppose having experienced it with my mother and my way through it, and actually through a sort of pretty complicated family situation after it, was to sort of make life and death like a sort of real part of me. And so, yeah, it gave me the confidence just to be like, if I'm gonna feel this, and it gets better, and not being scared of just letting it all out. Admittedly, I also got advice from a friend of mine who's a funeral director. He said, actually it's about modeling behavior in front of children. So feel free to let it out and don't be worried about that. And so I did. And then I said that to my therapist, the new therapist I got about a year and a half later, and she raised her eyebrows in a way when I thought, oh God, have I made a horrific mistake here? Just sort of totally distressed my children, taken up all the space for them to grieve. They think their dad's broken. I was like, I was following good advice from someone who's like a good death person, and now I've destroyed my children.
And how are your kids?
Oh, they're amazing. They're really super, and they were so young, like sort of 3, and just about to be. It was just before his 4th birthday, and so they are now just lovely boys. And I was brought up. I don't know what it was like for you, in a time where I think people thought that if there was a sad subject, the way to make it not sad was to not talk about it. So we barely did. And so that is not what we do. And so it was just, but like even before Imogen died, we used to do, I always did the bedtime, because she didn't really like sitting on her ass for 30 minutes while the children slept. And I was like, great, phone time. And so we'd always do thank you for all the people that we loved. And so now we say thank you for her every night. And, most meals will light a candle for her, and just to try to make it as natural and normal a time of their life. And I think I'm doing something which is good. And it's sort of, they might not remember the actual memory they first had, but we can help them to remember the memory they had when they were 2, and then the memory they had when they were 3, and then it'll be like a memory. So I hope I'm not doing a horrific psychological experiment where I implant my version of their mother into their head. And they need something to talk to a therapist about.
Well, I mean, I don't know, Sanderson, this is not my area of expertise at all, but my instinct is, and certainly my own experience is, that you never normalise these things, I don't think, but to honour someone's memory, to talk about it openly, to allow all feelings to be present.
Yeah, no, and so the weirdly, the hardest thing was when I told my son, and then I'd really worked up the speech, make sure you've got lots of people around them, make sure you've got all these peer, say it in clear things. And I said my little bit, and and I was like, do you have any questions? And he was like, can I go and play? But that's so heartbreaking because you're like, oh, fuck. So actually the hard thing is that you don't even know how awful this is. And that's okay. Like you'll get it later on and I can, do a good in my therapy. I'm also, and I don't think a huge amount of family, friends of mine will listen to this. This is a bit of an intriguing thing. I'm also doing therapy with my father at the moment.
Ooh, how interesting.
How intriguing, eh? How about that? He's not a therapy guy. And so with that, she did say it's actually the traumatic experiences. It's actually what happens after them, which ends up whether they have got a profound negative effect. And obviously, or, they're not entirely negative and all the rest, but they really change the outcome. And so you can, if you do the right things afterwards, then you'll get to a not the best possible, what is that, but a better outcome or one of the better outcomes or whatever it is.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, that in the purest terms, that it's never the event, whatever that event may be. It's how we view it, how we process it, how it impacts us. Because one person's horrific event can be somebody else's, minor blip, right? I mean, depending on the person, depending on the experience and how they... I guess what I'm curious on as I'm coming back to you is, in the last couple of years, well, less than, what have you learned about how you have responded to Imogen's death?
Well, it's actually very funny that you spoke about trauma, because hilarious, in fact, because when I lived with Imogen, lived with her, it's a ridiculous thing to say, but she was like, I wouldn't have been able to marry you if I didn't think you had ADHD, because she was able to get these things which I didn't do, which some people are like, oh, you're inconsiderate, you're not, whatever it is. She knew there was a thing. But then after a while she said, but actually there's a bit more going on. And I think that I'd done such a good job of, actually finding in quite a chaotic, my dad remarried someone who wasn't good news. And so my home life was just not, sort of didn't feel like home. And so this sort of love of life was a way of finding love in life. But there was this well of unprocessed trauma that when I'd get into a certain situation, I wouldn't be dealing with the situation. I would be dipping my toe into this deep, inky black well of chaos and sadness and overwhelm. And I would be crying trying to write an email. And all connected to, at the time, like there's an edit of a comedy thing that I wrote, which like I felt, and I couldn't open it to look at it. And so like really sort of trying to deal with that has been the thing which that makes it sound like it's not making it sound like I'm dismissing the grief. That's a whole other podcast. But my fear was that the sort of behavior which that drove would then destroy my life and that of the boys. Something where it's like, okay, I can handle the grief. I can make sense of it existentially. I can create lovely rituals for the boys. I can provide them with love and support and care. But then there's going to be a bill that I miss, and I'm going to drive myself into a panic. I'm going to start doing something well, but I'll forget to invoice because I feel like some weird thing about invoices because I've forgotten in the past. And you're a piece of shit and you can't even invoice people. And I can't live with that. So I just avoid it. And so it was, now I realize that the worry was that this sort of beast would overwhelm me and that I wouldn't be able to do the things which I know that I can do, and that the hard ones of providing love and support and care and being there would be great, but are you going to be able to arrange to sign them up to an activity before all the other people sign up and they're full?
And as you said earlier, you're trying to find the words here for something that's almost impossible to describe. But it strikes me that this is the biggest gift you're giving to your kids, is taking care of this thing.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I do feel that, they're going to be They're going to be all right. They're going to be great. They're going to have be surrounded by love. And, even though it's a bit of me, which is like, hopefully, even if I do make a mistake, that they'll hopefully see that it was sort of done for the right reasons of like really, and just really wanting them to have, me around a lot. Like I took sort of some time off when I was at Capgemini to be with them. And one of the reasons for moving to do something which was more flexible was that, just to be able to be with them more. And that time, which I had taken off where it was just me, I was like, if you've got a sports day or all these different things, you can sort of balance it between two people, like working flat out, but it would just be very hard in a job where you need to be there at times to go and be the parent that you'd want to be.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so, Sanderson, can you tell us a little bit about what you are doing now then to create the flexibility, and also I would assume to bring fulfillment and joy to yourself too, because that's important, right?
That is indeed important. So I have, I'm going to see if I can say, I am a funeral designer and celebrant. That's my latest formulation because, I'd been a celebrant many times. Once I started Sunday Assembly, standing in front of people in a sort of church-like service. There's people who say, would you be able to do our wedding? Or there's a friend of mine who asked me whether I could bury her father. And so I did that. And that felt really like a sort of coming together of, starting Sunday Assembly, which was a celebration of life, but which came from like a real acknowledgement of death and, how precious we all are and how, infinitely valuable every single second on earth is. And so I did that, and I did it on the side, and every now and again I'd be doing it and I'd think, people pay you really well for this. You love it and you're very good at it and it's really energizing. Why don't you just do it? And I think there was something where like some sort of ego involved of like scale and systems change and like impact. Don't just do something that you like. And it's actually some friends of mine suggested it after Imogen's funeral because I, was a celebrant for the first part of that and sort of contributed bits, as well as having two other amazing celebrants. And again, that was where my preparation, my career, like when this happened, I wasn't, even when she was in a coma in the hospital for 4 days. And it was beautiful. We got fake candles, flowers, things that she loved. Her friends came through to say goodbye. We had drinks in the evening. She was surrounded by love. And so that same thing of like looking at everything as an opportunity to show love and care, or, bringing things to the hospital, which from the house, which we now have in the house again, so that they're all part of that journey forever. And so then when, I had really good people to ask about what can you do for the funeral and I just really, wanting to just make it so special for her. There's a Tagore poem and it talks about why Shah Jahan wanted to build the Taj Mahal and, as a testament to his love. You knew Shah Jahan, life and youth, wealth and glory. They all drift away in the current of time. You strove, therefore, to perpetuate only the sorrow of your heart. Let the splendor of diamond, pearl, and ruby vanish like the magic shimmer of the rainbow. Only let this one teardrop, this Taj Mahal, glisten spotlessly bright on the cheek of time, forever and ever. O King, you are no more. Your empire has vanished like a dream. Your throne lies shattered. Your minstrels sing no more. You musicians no longer mingle their strains with the murmuring Jamuna. Despite all this, the courier of your love, untarnished by time, unwearied, unmoved by the rise and fall of empires, unconcerned with the ebb and flow of life and death, carries the ageless message of your love from age to age. Never shall I forget you, beloved. Never. And when I read that, was like, this is what I want to do. I want to just do this send off for her, which is just everything that she would like and is about her so much. And so there was, I had people to ask. And sort of new things like myself from doing it. And, when it came to build the coffin, like get the coffin, I was like, can we build one? As her best friend was a carpenter. And then there are other friends who are good at DIY, and her friends were painters. Some of her friends were painters or artists or just creative. And so they painted it beautifully. And she made these beautiful paintings around her workspace. And so we took that and I gave it to a friend of mine who's a graphic designer, and that became the sort of design on the order of service. And there was, I guess, the moment, and this is the thing which I often say to my clients now that I'm a funeral designer, which I can explain later, and celebrant, is that I was speaking to a Rue calendar. And so I said, yeah, so after we buried her in Scotland, right next to the wood where we got married near a little cottage we have up there. And so I said to him, so how would we get Imogen from London to Scotland? And there was a small pause, and he just said, rent a camper van. And I was like, sorry, what? This is a thing? He went, yeah, why would you? That's what, lots of people I know do. And he said, why would you? And it's that thing, there's so much of a philosophy of let me take that out of your hands. And then, in fact, this is a chance to how can you care for this person? How can people get involved and feel that they're a part of it in some way, which appeals to the Scottish part in my nature, because it's also a very good dealie. but you end up being able to do something which is more meaningful, sort of has more impact, I suppose. And you it's also, you get more bang for your buck, because these things can be expensive. And but I didn't object to spending money on stuff. I just objected to spending money on stuff which didn't really make a difference, or wasn't her, or any of these other things.
I suppose the intention in all of this was, as you said earlier, everything is an opportunity for love. So the intention, that I'm taking from this is the deep desire to honour her memory in the best possible way you could, involve as many of her friends as you could, make use of all of their talents and skills. As a true kind of communal celebration is what it's sounding like to me.
Yes, and I think there's also something which I've sort of reflected upon afterwards, is that, so for an atheist, I end up quoting the Bible more than most. Jesus's definition of a church was, a church is wherever two people meet in my name. And actually, if you go and think of a community, it's two people gathering in the name of something. And so I think that's good. And so what happens is that if you think about someone going to the football match, you're I did the funeral of someone who was an Arsenal fan. And then when you're there in the crowd, you become Arsenal. You feel Arsenal. We are the Arsenal. And then if you see a great comedian, or you go to a certain festival, you feel the community. What does that happen? And it's between the relationships, the energy, the communication. And then and so a good funeral, which is done well in the way which brings in that person's name, you actually sort of feel them. You feel their energy. And there might be some people who see that in a spiritual way, which is true. You'd be but I think there's a perfectly rational, not to say that the other people are irrational, there's a scientific way of explaining it as well. And then if you do have that feeling, when you get to say goodbye, you're saying goodbye to the person as you remembered them, and you don't have this feeling that we were in a crematorium where they'd never go, or we had an order of service which was ugly, or the priest didn't really know them. And so you feel that you say goodbye to that person. And so all of those sort of decisions and all of those things that add up to people being able to reconnect with their spirit.
You're creating a space, aren't you? You're creating a space, no matter where it is. You're creating a space in which all of those edges blur. It's like everything comes together into some kind of oneness.
Yeah. I mean, I spoke to someone who I'm going to help plan her funeral. hit me up if you'd like to plan your funeral. She's going to be the first person I do it for, so I'll report back if it works. And for her, it was going to her mother's funeral, and she was just like, the order of service, it felt like a pizza leaflet. And you're just like, my mum does not get pushed through a bloody letterbox, like that's not her. And she was trying to hurry us up. No. So I've started, and I started calling myself a funeral designer after this funeral that I did for someone who'd been at the first funeral I did. He'd done the eulogy for his friend Richard. And so after the funeral, Richard's son approached me and he said, when I spoke to him about what happened, he said, well, you're more like a funeral designer. Because actually, when I love it when I meet people quite early, so that I can explain a lot of the directions which they might be put in by a funeral director are not bad options, but that's just the natural thing that they will do, that you can go this way. And so at that funeral that I did last Friday, but sort of getting to know him, he was a huge Arsenal fan. And first it was initially going to be outside this prayer hall. It was a Jewish funeral, which was quite interesting to be asked. And my initial, I was like, okay, Arsenal, I was looking at all these different things it could be. And I had this moment when leaving, because I said, and like, I get with decorations, particularly if it's outside, just go with one simple big thing. And his wife just said, like, she sort of crumpled a bit and was like, I can't, I can't even think about that. And as I left, I had this realization. I was like, well, you're paying me, so I can think about it. I can do it. And it was just, I was like, oh, this job is amazing because you feel like this, and you're not the sort of person like me who wants to, like, and it was also happening so much quicker. Like, so, and in that case, I thought we could drape the building in red and white cloth, like, which costs nothing, right? And then we can make a flag, looks like one of those like banners people have for managers, and put his face on it and his name, and it'll be huge. And didn't go with the flag. It was a bit complicated. And then we decided to move it inside. And so there are these beams. And so we hung red and white cloth from these two beams, and then had fairy lights going up the side. I had to unpack my Christmas lights after I'd packed them up neatly, and they're still very messy. And suddenly this room, which looked, like a very old prayer hall, it has got life and vibrancy, and that cost 85 quid.
And how did she feel about it?
Oh, they were really, really delighted. They just sent such lovely messages afterwards, and I didn't yet have. I need to get business cards, because that's the prime time to do it. So real wasted opportunity there. And so it was just, I sent to a friend of mine. I said, I think they were really happy on what would be the shittiest of days, and
that if you have like a mission statement to make people really happy on what would otherwise be the shittiest of days. I mean, that sounds about right. And I guess you don't need business cards. I mean, I know that was a joke, but you don't, because everyone experienced it.
Yeah, well, I get that, but I also do need business cards. They are handy. And I have yet to say, by the way, please, can you put my details at the back of the order of service? But I will in future, because, I will ask. You can always ask. And so then, someone got in touch with me actually yesterday. I always met them yesterday, and they were just at the start of the process. And I was able to say, like, they were looking at a crematorium, still might do it, but it was like, okay, we'll do the serious part there. And I did say, I was like, once you go to a crematorium, it's sort of got a ceiling on it. It can only be like crematorium shaped, even if you do everything else, unless you book it for, 2 hours before to redecorate it. But then they've also got, I was told that we couldn't have whistles in a service in a crematorium. I was like, but it's in it. And I said, could we have a brass band? Yes. Could we have a piper? Yes. Could we have an opera singer? They're all louder than whistles, but whistles are more disturbing. And so they've got these, so it's just like it can, they're what have you. And it was like, well, okay, we'll do a shorter one, even shorter there. And then we'll do more like that in the pub. And then gradually it was like, well, actually, let's try to find a place which feels like that the whole time. And it's really wonderful to be able to, help people in that way. And it's, and I charge way more than most celebrants. That's the thing. And so that's always a conversation I have. But actually, I'm often sort of going, well, do you need that? No. Do you need that? How about we do that there? And again, the same thing is there was stuff that we took out, but there was also stuff we put in because actually, I think people don't mind spending money on the people they love. I think my own theory with funerals is people mind spending money on funerals when you don't really see the return.
Well, it doesn't feel like good value if you're having a miserable experience, And so the thing is joyful and alive and full of life, then the money isn't going to be an issue, is it?
It doesn't matter. And so that's the thing. It's like, do you you spend £1,000 more on me, maybe a bit more, depending on how much I do. But you end up with something where you're just, at the end of it, so many, a lot of people came. There's a bit of me that says I shouldn't say this because I'm British, but a lot of people came and said it's the best funeral I've ever been to, and so it's just so satisfying to do it. And now after an initial 3 months of figuring out Google ads and all the rest of it, I've had a couple of months of people getting in touch, and so it also feels not a totally foolhardy mission.
And to know that there are options, that we don't have to go through the awfulness of it, and that's possibly unfair to many people's experience, but nevertheless potentially awful. The last thing we want to be thinking about, someone like you comes along, listens deeply and carefully to what we need, takes it out of our hands, designs something beautiful.
Though I'd say that takes it out of our hands is that I'd go back to takes the things you don't want to do out of your hands, but also says, would you like to do this? This is something, okay, you can go and get the £3,000 coffin, but what if you go to B&Q and you go and get the things yourself and you make it? And we didn't actually save any money on that coffin, I don't think. And it was a lot more work, but then it was something that was meaningful. And so it is about, I think, just people realizing that because they turn up and to these people in a state, just what do I do? You're suddenly asked to organize an event you've never put on before. Imagine if when someone died, you had to put on an opera.
And you're reliant, I imagine, on people. I haven't had this direct experience myself, but I'm imagining reliant on other people telling you, what to do. So someone like you, and I think for me, the emphasis is on you listening to what people need.
That's the thing which I think someone, I need to find a different way to express it. Because I said to someone who got in touch, I said, well, probably 5 to 6 hours with you finding out about your father. And it is, it's not like that makes it sound like a police sort of interview, but it's certainly 2.5, who are then coming back and saying, how about this? They say some more. Then, in the sort of, there's a friend of mine who had something for weddings, which is a day of listening and design, a day of creating and iterating, and then a day of delivery. And so you end up saying to people, it's like, oh, you've come for an hour. It's like, well, actually, to do that hour well, you probably will take a day.
I'm also wondering, when you're in conversation with the bereaved person, your client in this context, how ready might they be to talk about it? How easy or difficult would it be in that moment? And I guess that'll require certain skills from you, won't it, in terms of listening and being present and holding the space to bring that sort of stuff out, I imagine.
Yeah, so I did some, I think listening is an acquired skill of mine. And so I've done, did a sort of the coaching qualification from Cambridge University. But the part where you can just pay and go to, it's great. Madingley Hall, guys, really spiffs up your LinkedIn. And so I did that a bit. It was something to go and get some more skills. And obviously there's a lot of listening in other areas of my life. And so then, doing that at Sunday Assembly and various groups and other things. And it is, really about, trying to get as much as possible from people. I think one of the things is that having walked in their shoes, or certainly similar shoes, then it does mean that I feel a quite instinctive, understanding and able to, people know my grief, my grief credentials. So it's like if you hear it'll get better from the wrong person, you're like, yeah, like it's just that, yeah. So it's no, it really like it's a lot of you picking things up, and sometimes it'll be explicit things. He liked this music. Other times it'll be, he loved, going to the beach. Oh, what if we flood the place with seawater? I don't know. That's a
Yeah,
bad example.
but yes, the thing that he loved, how you recreate that. Picking up a little bit on what you were talking about earlier, which I interpreted as finding ways of being okay. And when I say what you were talking about earlier was your personal experience of trauma and this sort of unconscious, uncontrollable, reactive part of yourself, which we all have, but, felt intensely, as you described. And working with that for your own sake, for the sake of your sons, your family, and Imogen's memory. And wanting to find more ways, is how I'm hearing it, of being okay. So my question for you, Sanderson, as someone who has experienced so much difficulty, in the deepest difficulty that most of us dread, and found a way of building relationship with it over the years, how do you know when you're okay?
I guess it's like little, I often think about how there's some animals in ecosystems that are like, if there's salmon in the Thames is doing okay. If there's a wolf in Epping Forest, I don't know. I don't know if that's a very good sign or a very bad sign. And, for me, it will be like really small things like, I'm not the tidiest person. I walk past something and I just pick it up and I do it. There's something on my list and I don't sort of put it off. Those are, probably the things which I might have aversions to, I can do quite easily. The sort of the wrong type of beer, when you're just like, I can have a beer and I can be okay. And I can have a beer and I'm sort of, it's a bad day. And, and if and it's more like if that happens many days in a row, or, you can watch TV, but if you're just like instantly switching off and doing it. And so there's probably the tidiness of the house is a semi-decent one, though also I've learned not to equate that with sort of moral success. So yeah, it is just lots of small things which go and indicate that, I've got space for that, or I'm got the ability to deal with that. Like a letter comes in and I instantly deal with it. I mean, this is a bit weird. Like I say this aloud, and it sounds so cringy when they're, I'd be like, I've often the thing is like, I can deal with death. I know how to find meaning in the universe, but letters throw me. Like, what on earth is that? They're like, yeah, great. Finding meaningful work, being able to do it, not being worried about that, but then something else crunches in, and that's the unconscious. But it's like it's when the Dick Cheney unknown unknowns, when you don't realize where it's coming from, or ways to stop it. So I think I am feeling okay when also like I am tidying the garden. Like, okay, I've got time to tidy the garden. The attempted I tried to make an ice rink after went in the big cold snap. I came back and saw the fronds were frozen, so I got like some plastic dust sheets, used some logs, filled it with water, and it froze, didn't form an ice rink. And I was like, I bet that will be there in 4 months time. It wasn't. It is gone. Only 2 weeks afterwards, it looked like I was sort of like drying, making salt or something like that. So I guess it is the little things which I either have time for or don't have time for when I'm finding things overwhelming. And, if I'm able to do those, then I think I'm doing okay.
So, this podcast, I called it Fearless Forward, not because I think that we move forward without fear, far from it. But how do we live with our fear and move forward somehow? So I'm curious, when you think about Fearless Forward, what does it mean to you?
I guess it would be there are some fears that you are able to handle, and you go, okay, I'm going to do this. It's a bit scary, but I'm going to do it anyway, and then that'll be good. And then there'll be the other fears, I'd say, and these are the ones I'm sort of like bumping into more now, which, if you do have them, like if you do have these things, which are the ones which prevent you getting forward and prevent you doing something, and you might not even know what they are. Like there would be these things I wouldn't have been able to sort of put into words why there was stuff that I really wasn't able to do and which I could do. And to that, I'd say really, if there are these things which seem insurmountable, then really, like, it's okay to not do it, but try to find out what is the actual thing which is stopping you, because sometimes they're a lot bigger than you realize. And the fear you put on it might not actually be the fear that there is there. There might be something which is really deep and like probably spreading out into lots of places. This is my experience of me. And so then, finding, like, if that's the case in something, then really there's lots of different ways you can do it. Listening to this podcast probably. And then I suppose I guess it would be trying to turn fears which paralyze you into sort of fears which you can find ways around. And if there are the ones which are, big, scary monsters, then you have to look at the big, scary monster, not the thing that is preventing you from doing. I also think sometimes fears are so big that you manifest that you have been able to get through them by creating relatively healthy ways to surpass them. And that might involve you not even realizing that is a fear. And that might be the way that you have been able to get through. So actually, it might be something you don't identify at all. Like, I reckon there's a few men who are listening to this podcast who would say, I don't really get anxious, but sometimes when something goes wrong, I get really, really angry at someone else. And you're like, well, let's dig into that, because if you didn't make you anxious, you wouldn't care.
In the face of death, celebrate life. Not once, but twice, Sanderson has endured the premature loss of the most important person in his life, and the death of his beloved Imogen surfaced the unresolved trauma from his mother's death 30 years before. Sanderson developed coping mechanisms, and these effectively masked his trauma reactions for some years, until they started to leak out, as they do, in the form of damaging behaviours. Terrified that these might get the better of him and stop him being the father he wants to be for his 2 boys, he asked for and got the help he needed to help him confront what he calls the inky black well of chaos, sadness, and overwhelm inside him. He's found a great therapist. For him, a sign it's working is when he's able to get on with the simple day-to-day tasks that might previously have put him into a state of complete paralysis. Feeling fortunate to be alive does not, Sanderson says, give you immunity to grief. The cataclysmic sense of loss is real and needs to be honoured. He's now directing everything he's learned about life and death into his new vocation as a funeral designer and celebrant. To me, it feels like a wonderful synthesis of all his beliefs, skills, and experience, his urge to celebrate life and to help others, his understanding of the power of community, his experience of hosting inspiring gatherings, his presentational and oratorical skills, and not least what he calls his grief credentials. Sanderson is on a mission to transform funerals into a celebration of the spirit of the person we grieve for, to connect with a feeling of happiness on what might otherwise be the worst of days. I personally can't imagine anyone whose help I'd welcome more, and if you feel the same way, you can find Sanderson's contact details in the podcast notes. Thank you for listening. Fearless Forward is edited and produced by Mark Steadman. I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for our next conversation about how leaders have faced their fears. To be sure of catching it, go to fearlessforward.org, activate push notifications from your favourite podcast source, or subscribe to my weekly bulletin at skillfulleaders.com.